Tantor Audio presents The Rose Legacy by Kristen Heitzmann. Narrated by Renée Chambliss. 1. It is a fact that the human heart differs from all other species. While its function to the body is the same of all animals, its participation with the human soul is both rhapsodic and fatal. Rose. June 7, 1880. With a hollow crack, the wagon lurched to the side and lolloped like a large lamed animal. Yanking on the reins, Carina DiGratia set the brake with one deft foot and brought it to a grinding halt. She pressed a hand to her chest while her heart pounded in her throat. A quick glance to the left made her head swim. It was not that the grade of the road was so steep, but rather that it wound upward until it brought her to a dizzying height that overlooked the chasm below, a chasm filled with teeth ready to chew and swallow her. She closed her eyes and resisted the swelling fear. Nothing in the traveler's guide she had read mentioned a road more fit for mountain sheep than human travel. Praying the brake would hold, Carina jumped down and snatched up a rock the size of a bantam hen. This she shoved behind the wagon's outside back wheel. Then she hurried to the other side. There, between the wagon and the rock wall of the canyon, she crouched to survey the damage. Loose rungs and a cracked felly that rendered the wheel worthless. This after everything else. Perché? Why? She stood up and kicked the wheel's rim. The shock of the blow jarred her shin up to the knee, and she gasped in pain, gripping her leg and hopping backward. Then she balled her fists and stood still, feet planted, and scowled at the wheel as though that could make it right. Carina should have known that the old wagon-right was cheating her, the way he wouldn't look her in the eye. She had sensed it, but ignored her feelings because she trusted. Always she trusted. The old man had thought her a fool, and she had proved him right. She pressed the heel of her hand to her forehead and paced behind the wagon, halting well short of the edge. Turning, Carina shaded her eyes with her hand and surveyed the trail that snaked up the canyon wall. She should be grateful. A broken outside wheel might have tipped her over the brink. Her stomach lurched at the thought, and she stumbled, gripping the wagon bed. She edged around the side of the wagon to the large umber mule harnessed there, and ran her hand along the enormous dusty back, then tangled her fingers in his wiry mane, taking comfort in his company. Bene. And in English, well, what now, Dom? He snuffled her hand, the stiff whiskers of his velvety muzzle tickling her palm. His deep brown eyes looked wise and sympathetic, but he had no answers, in English or Italian. He was only a mule. Carina felt very alone. She unhitched the harness and led him over to the pink granite wall of the canyon, where the thin shade would succor him for the moment. Half a mile down and half a mile up, the trail widened, but here, perched on the side of the mountain, it was scarcely the width of the wagon. Naturally, the wheel broke at this precarious location. Carina raised an open hand to heaven. Grazie, signore. A thin, sparkling stream seeped from the rock wall and ran across the road. Flecks of black and white stood out from the darkened pink granite, catching the sun like facets of gems. She glared at the rut that had jolted the wheel. It wasn't much of a rut, but large enough to find the flaw in her wheel and expose it, causing the awful hollow pop, the sudden dip and lurch that had sent her heart to her throat. Carina glanced down over the edge to the blue and white water rushing far below, the pointed spires of pines along its banks, the long stony slope, cliff-like in pitch. She had avoided the sight these last miles as the road dug its way more steeply and sharply up the side, climbing away from the creek's edge, toward the blue expanse of sky. What was she doing? She signed herself with the cross, then sank to the ground, where trail met wall. Above her, a single stunted pine sprang from a crack in the rock, amid a shock of dry buff-colored grass. Its stringy roots dangled at her back, a lacy veil where the earth had fallen away from the stone. A precarious perch, yet it clung there and grew. That tenacity, that spirit, did she not possess the same? Had not Papa said so from the time she was small, calling her Tigra, his little tiger cub? She didn't feel like a tiger now, so far from home and family. But she must. She must make the fight rise up inside. So the wheel was broken, the road narrow, the canyon steep. Would she be defeated by so little after coming so far? She need only wait. This was the road to Crystal, Colorado, the diamond of the Rockies, a magic city where dreams came true. She felt her chest swell with hope and determination. From the branches above, a crow cackled. She didn't care. Let the foolish bird laugh. She would show it what Carina DiGratia was made of. The shade was no more than a foot's width under the noonday sun, but it cooled her. For the last several hours, the sun had burned from a sky the azure blue of Tia Marta's bread bowl. The travel journals were right to declare the air thin at this elevation. She must be higher than 10,000 feet, now that she was near the summit of the pass. Dom's heaving breaths and her own were witness enough. She dropped her head back against the mountainside and untied the wide-brimmed hat that Mama had sent. She wanted to see clearly, without the brim blocking her view, no matter how frightful the prospect. Again, thoughts of the steep drop invaded her mind. So she was not good with heights. She had known that already, ever since Divina lured her onto the roof when she was only 4. Carina closed her eyes and heard her sister's voice. "Do not lean so, Carina. Carina, don't—" Opening her eyes, Carina rubbed her forearm. The break had healed well, the youthful bone knitting easily. But the fear had stayed, though she tried again and again to conquer it. And she had never forgiven Divina that. She sent her gaze across the valley to the opposite slope. So why was she now on this mountaintop? Why did she tempt God? Unbidden, another memory came, sharp and clear, as though etched onto the plate of her mind. Voices, low and soft, through the barn wall where Carina pressed close to listen. A dim shadow in the moonlight. Murmurs and quiet laughter, a whisper and an answer, deeper and far more dear, sending shards of broken dreams, jagged and piercing, to Carina's heart. How she had screamed, cursing them as they scrambled apart in the hay. The names she had called, thrusting her thumb into Flavio's chest when he tried to excuse the inexcusable. And Divina laughing behind her hand. That, too, she would not forgive. Even now, the humiliation, the hurt, was as fresh as that night 3 weeks ago. She had prayed, "What do I do? How do I endure this?" She had begged God for an answer. And there, the very next morning, had been the advertisement, a home and opportunities. Grazie a Dio, it was her answer. So here she was, climbing the mountain into the sky, half a continent from Sonoma, California. If Flavio wanted her, let him come and prove it. She raised her knees and dropped her elbows into the skirt draped between them. There she rested her chin, eyeing the beige linen hem. Bent that way, the bones of her corset pinched her lower ribs beneath her white cambric blouse. She couldn't sit long. Smacking her palms on her thighs, she stood up and tossed the hat into the wagon bed, then paced, considering her dilemma. She could unload the wagon and have Dom drag her things one at a time up the slope, except maybe the rocker, the bedding, and the dishes. But then what would she do with the wagon? Not even the sturdy mule could pull a 3-wheeled wagon. Yet she couldn't leave it there in the middle of the road. Though it was small, at this narrow point only 2 men abreast could pass it on one side. And tipped as it was into the wall of the canyon, she wasn't certain the damaged wheel could be removed and replaced. Could the wagon be disassembled and hauled down? She jerked her head at a sound and peered down the trail. A large wagon was climbing, pulled by a team of 4 powerful horses. The front 2 a pair of sprightly matched blacks, the next 2 even larger, caramel brown with white markings. Clydesdales, surely. A single driver urged them along, sitting high in front of the load of cargo meticulously covered and tied behind him. She did not think he had seen her as he maneuvered the horses onto the narrowing incline and started up the cut. No matter, he would reach her soon enough with such fine, strong horses. Surely this wagon was sent by God. She recognized the gift. "Grazie, signore," she breathed, with no sarcasm, no scolding this time. She brushed the dust from her skirt and waited, the breeze catching her hair and tossing it. Carelessly, she caught the rippling strands with a hand and held them back from her face. Dom raised his head and brayed as the stranger drew in rein behind her wagon, encircling them in dust like fog off the sea. "Whoa!" Sitting high above her on the wooden box, the man touched the broad brim of his hat, but didn't remove it. The high noon shadow hid all but the jut of his chin and the mane of light brown hair that hung impudently to his shoulders. Shielding her eyes, Carina squinted up. "Good afternoon." She made her voice strong. If it came to dickering, she would not be cheated again. "Wagon trouble?" His had a strength of its own. "A broken wheel." The man gave only a cursory look to the damaged wheel, then eyed the trail above and the drop-off to their left. "Bad place." Carina nodded toward the load behind him. "You have a spare?" "Not that size." She noted the difference between his immense wheels and her own with a sinking heart. But maybe there was something else to be done, some repair possible, some... He leaped down from the box and strode over to inspect the damage more closely. His hand found the discoloration on the felly where it had cracked. "Wheel was flawed." "The man who sold it was dishonesto, a crook." The stranger stood up, and Carina got a brief look at his face, rough-shaven with a full mustache curving to his jawline. When he tipped his hat back and wiped his forehead with his sleeve, she glimpsed gray eyes before he turned away. He walked to the front of the wagon and looked up the trail, then patted Dom and stroked his muzzle with a soft hand. He eyed the splay in the legs and heaving sides. "Your mule couldn't have pulled much longer anyway, not at the summit." "He's very strong." He didn't argue, just looked up the trail again. "Your husband shouldn't leave you alone out here, even to go for help. This isn't exactly civil country." Carina drew herself up. "I am traveling alone." That would give her credence and establish her equal footing. She wouldn't tell him that her own papa had seen her to San Francisco and put her into the care of Guido and Antonia Mollica, related by marriage to the Ghirardellis themselves. Together, they'd taken the long and tedious Southern Pacific Railroad to Salt Lake City, where she'd been handed over to Anna and Francesca Bordolino, maiden aunts on Mama's side. They rode the Union Pacific to Cheyenne and the Kansas Pacific into Denver. Only then was she deserted to find a means of travel up this godforsaken road, none of which this man needed to know. Carina held out her hand. "Miss Carina Maria DiGratia." He made no move to take it, just eyed her blankly and, she thought, a little darkly. Feeling foolish, she withdrew her hand and waved at her cargo. "How much to haul this?" He rubbed his chin with the back of his hand, then passed by her to the wagon bed. "As you can see, ma'am, Miss DiGratia, I've a full load of freight, all that my team can manage." So he meant to dicker after all. Bene, she would dicker. Carina walked to the pair of blacks. Their necks steamed with sweat, but their ears were high, and no white showed around the dark eyes. They were workhorses, but fine nonetheless. "They seem strong and healthy enough." "They are, and I mean to keep them that way. What do you need more than anything else?" Carina turned to her own wagon. She eyed the trunk, the rocker, the rolls of bedding and feather mattress tied up with string, the dainty iron bed frame, the crates of books, dishes, and pans, jarred tomatoes and wheels of cheese, her nonna's silver, the leather satchel. She reached for the last item automatically, then grabbed the rose-patterned carpet bag. He had indicated one thing, but she cleverly took two. He made no argument, and that heartened her. She might have the better of this after all. He took the satchel and swung it up, then wedged it behind the box. "Be careful." If he heard, he paid no mind. He tossed the carpetbag onto the box and hoisted her up with the same care. From her high seat, Carina watched him take Dom by the reins, ease him along the edge, and tie him to the back of the freight wagon. That was the limit of this man's charity, she supposed. Now he would bargain for the rest. She would let him speak first, otherwise she would sound too eager. But he said nothing, merely walked around to the front of her wagon and worked the wheels to the left, then came around the back. His silent purpose unsettled her. As much as she hated to start the dealings, he left her no choice. "Now we'll discuss the cost of all the other things?" "Nope." He put his shoulder to the back end of the wagon, lifted and pushed, straining hard for a moment, then easing it as it started to move. She suddenly realized what he was doing. "No! Stop!" Carina leaped down from the seat, landing on her knees in the dust, then rushed to the edge of the trail as her wagon plummeted down the slope. It struck the ridge and shattered into pieces, her belongings smashing and tumbling to the creek below. Through the air, the straw hat sailed, ecru ribbons fluttering. Her head swam, even as the anguish clutched her heart, leaving her breathless and stunned. "Whoa!" The perpetrator of destruction caught her arm and tugged her backward as the loose gravel slid away beneath her feet. Incensed, she wrenched free, anger suddenly eclipsing the hurt. "Shoka, fool, you have lost me everything I own." Stiff splayed fingers accented her point. "I don't even have a change of clothes." "Then you should have chosen your trunk." He turned for his wagon. And now she was a tiger. She snatched up her skirt and followed him, waving a hand in his face. "How could I know you meant to send my things over the side?" She couldn't bear to think of them there, smashed and scattered. She could only think of lashing this bricone, this knave, with her tongue. He spared her scarcely a glance. "You had the trail blocked. I have freight to deliver." How dare he? Mama's rocker, the books, everything that had meant enough to bring all the way from Sonoma, California to Crystal to build her dream. Pain left her with no answer, save a sob that collected in her throat. He moved to lift her again to the box of his wagon, but she thrust his hand away. Undaunted, he motioned to the seat. "You'd better ride along." "No, Grazie." She forced the words through clenched teeth. He looked down the road behind his wagon, then shrugged. "Suit yourself." He walked around to the back and untied Dom, whose saddle was gone with the wagon, of course. The mule wore only the harness bridle and looked at her mournfully, as though that were his fault. The freighter held out the rein. "Stage'll be along shortly. I suggest you don't wait." Bene, now he was giving advice? Again, the anger threatened to bring tears. She took the reins and eyed with dismay the height of Dom's back. In her skirt, without a stirrup? The man stooped and made a step with his hands. With pleasure, she stepped on him, wishing to kick as well. Astride, Carina held the reins and waited while the freighter mounted the box of his wagon and whistled to his team. Too late, she realized her mistake as dust rose and took hold of her. Choking and fanning her face, she remembered her bags tucked carelessly behind his seat. "Wait! Stop!" The creak of wheels, the rattle of harness, and the clomp of hooves kept him from hearing. Or perhaps he chose not to. She turned back and saw the stagecoach below, just starting the narrow climb. The roof was covered with passengers, all men, and she could only suppose the seats inside were filled as well. As it neared, she saw more clearly what manner of men sat atop. Rough, desperate-looking men. She now guessed what the freighter had meant. With no choice but to follow in his dust, she kicked her heels, and Dom plodded up the winding road. Patient, steadfast, and long-suffering. Dom had come with her all the way from Sonoma, first by train from the wine country to Denver, then pulling the small purchased wagon into the mountains without complaint, though it was more than one beast should bear. She clung to him now, with her heels as tight as her nerves. Around a bend and down the slope a short way, she saw the remains of a horse, its ribs bare to the sun, old flesh clinging like tattered rags. She shuddered and looked away, thankful Dom's strength had never failed her. He plodded on, though it seemed each hoof was weighted down and each breath a struggle. She urged Dom forward. The road dipped down briefly and grew rough with craggy pink boulders bubbling up from the white dirt. Just ahead, the horses drawing the freight wagon strained, and their driver urged them in low tones, but did not apply the rein or whip. Here was her chance, and Carina took it, drawing up alongside. "Stop! Hold there! You have my bags!" She motioned to the seat beside him. He looked over his shoulder as though the bags had climbed there themselves, then reined in his team. With a swift motion, he heaved the carpetbag free and tossed it down to her. She caught it with a solid thud to her chest, then looked up as he readied to fling the next. "Don't throw it!" Just like Mama, she put generations of Italian matriarchs into that command, and it rang with Mediterranean fervor no man could ignore. He stopped and leaned down with the bag, and she snagged it from his grasp. "Thank you." "Sure you don't want to ride?" She ached already from riding bareback on Dom's bony spine, but she shook her head and stuffed the bags before her on the mule's withers. "Don't show the hurt, nor even the anger. Show him nothing, and don't cry." She put up her chin. "No, I don't want to ride. But I will go before you now, as I make less dust." He sat back, his head half cocked, and allowed her to pass. Now she need only follow the road. She may have lost her belongings, but not her purpose. Had she not a deed in her bag, and a future ripe with possibilities? With a nudge of her heels, she urged Dom on, upward again, closer and closer to the sky. Then, at last, around the bend that crested the pass. Carina caught her breath at the majestic grandeur before her. The valley opened up, encircled by mountains. One snow-streaked peak was reflected in the glassy blue lake beneath it, the line of contour repeated in exact detail. Bright, frothy green climbed the feet of the range, blending into the darkened crevices thick with pine. It was virgin beauty so fresh, it suspended the motion of her chest and sliced through her rancor to the soft part of her spirit. Dom dropped his head to graze on the grass beside the road, but Carina could not pull her eyes from the vision. This place, like none she had seen before, would be hers. This beauty, reward enough for what she had lost. Surely, surely, this was the place of dreams after all. She pulled on the reins and set Dom a steady pace. That must be Mount Point, and according to the traveler's guidebook, Crystal was not far past the lake. Her spirits rose at the thought of reaching her destination. Perhaps there was even some recourse she could take for the loss of her property. Perhaps the freighter could be made to pay damages. The thought sharpened the pain of knowing she had lost more than things. She had lost the remembrance of her memories. Yet not everything was gone. She clutched the leather satchel closer to her chest. She had almost left it, should have left it, but could not. It was foolish, like holding a burning coal, but she held it, letting it burn. For 2 hours she rode downward into the valley, eagerly looking about in spite of her discomfort. She drank in the scenery like an elixir, a tonic for her loss and fury. Even Dom seemed to sense it, and bobbed his head as he walked. The air, breathable now, was shockingly clear and invigorating, acting on her mind and lungs in a healthful way. Oh, she had made the right choice, no matter the hardships. As she left the lake behind and climbed again into a cleft valley, she slowed the mule in dismay. The denuded slopes ahead looked obscene, the trees hacked down and dragged away to the sprawling clutter of clapboard canvas and dust that could only be Crystal, Colorado. It was worse, far worse than Fairplay, where she'd spent the night before, thinking it was a poor relation to the city that would greet her this day. Carina stared, unbelieving. Unlike the illustrations in the travel guide, Crystal was a stubbed wound in the ripped and quarried mountainside. A scar, a disfigurement. She felt the injury as to herself. How could this be the place of her dreams? The diamond. It was flawed, crushed, fouled. She felt the greed ooze from the shafts and diggings, the infection that had taken hold and was boring into the mountain's heart. She felt stripped, like the very slopes. This ugliness was not what had brought her 1,000 miles from Sonoma, California. What was I thinking? This was not a place of dreams. It was a nightmare, and for the first time, she questioned her good sense. 2. Is there any pain an enemy can inflict that compares to that done by a friend? Rose. The freighter had caught up to her as Carina lingered, stunned. He went by without a word, passing between the first shacks and tents along the rushing stream. She tasted his dust again as he maneuvered around the stumps in the road. They were everywhere, the remainders of trees used to build the shaft houses and mining works on the hillsides, the log cabins and businesses, and the tall fronts of the stores along the main street. Dully, Carina followed as best she could, the entire way clogged with mules, wagons, and teams. The noise was unbelievable after the mountain silence. She choked on the dust, though it was the least of the smells that assaulted her. With a sudden yank, she reined in as the freighter before her lurched to a stop behind a braying mass of mules, smaller than Dom and mean-tempered. "Get on now." He swung his hat at the beasts, and they shied away enough for him to pass. Realizing he was her best hope, Carina stayed close behind. As they pushed through, the mule skinner turned a gap-toothed grin her way and spat. She turned away and scanned the buildings on the near side. 2 were of brick, the Crystal Hotel and the Miners' Exchange Bank. A few were stone, the rest pine logs and clapboard. She had time to study them in detail as the traffic on the street reached an impasse. She would do better on foot. Scanning the signs within sight, she found the livery stable across the way. She turned to Dom and urged him through the crowd to the far side of the street and back half a block. A tallow-haired boy waiting in the doorway took Dom and her payment inside. She would not leave him long, only until she had found her house and seen whether it had a shelter for the mule. Standing between her bags on the street, she held her ears against the din, then realized there was no help for it. She dropped her hands and considered the situation. It was on the opposite side of the street that the most important buildings stood, and behind them the more permanent dwellings. That was where she would find her house, not among the shacks and tents sprawled on either side of the swiftly rushing creek. Carina grasped her bags and plunged into the masses filling the street, hearing spatters of German, Spanish, and Italian, though less familiar southern dialects of Abruzzese, Ciociari, and Sicilian among the English. But she didn't stop to look even when she reached the far boardwalk. Thank God she'd had the presence of mind to grab her carpet bag, or the deed, the key, and her banknotes would be at the bottom of the canyon with everything else. Briccone.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?